This week's film is a summary of an original 1957 road test article comparing the Chevy, Ford, and Plymouth. Performance info has been added, and the article was summarized for easier consumption and re-uploaded. It would be nearly impossible to recreate a comparable, independently bought off the showroom condition road test of three closely equipped vehicles that are 67 years old. Bugs that were present in 1957 would not be present, and most replacement parts have been improved. So, onto the article. This road test from 1957 compares the Chevrolet 210, Ford Custom 300, and Plymouth Savoy, V8 deluxe four-door sedans equipped with standard engines and automatic transmissions, while Chevrolet for 57 retains much of its same design except a modified ride, a changed appearance, and a larger engine. Ford and Plymouth for 57 are almost completely new cars. All three models saw price increases, with Plymouth's prices now nearing Ford and Chevrolet. Features like low-pressure tires were shared across all three, resulting in greater parking maneuver effort. Let's do a quick breakdown of what changed for 57. The Chevrolet 210 got basically a facelift, with a new grille, a new instrument panel. The rear fins are similar to the 56 Plymouth. Seats are improved, and visibility is better over the hood. The car drives as before. It is quiet and smooth. This car had a set of bad thumping tires, though. The 57 Chevy has precise steering, but required more effort over the 56. And while Chevrolet remains one of the best handling cars, on rough roads it has a bouncy, uncomfortable ride, slightly better than 56, though. The 283 provides more power this year. The Chevy is visibly taller than the Ford or Plymouth at 3 inches, but it does make entry easier. The Ford offers a lower, longer appearance than the Chevrolet, though it is harder to enter and has an uncomfortable front seat with limited road visibility. The car is noisy at lower speeds, but quietens at higher ones. With a more softer floating suspension this year, it absorbs small ripples and larger bumps better than the previous model, but rough roads cause noticeable shaking in the hood and front fenders. The lower ride height helps during cornering, and the steering, while slower than before, is easier and more precise. The Ford has enough power to get the job done, but doesn't match the Chevy. But overall, we found this year's changes a step in the right direction. The Plymouth is the longest and has good vision and comfortable seats, minus the center section over the driveshaft tunnel. The rear-view mirror is useless with middle seat passengers, though. Engine is quiet and bigger at 301 cubic inches. Steering is precise like the Chevy, and almost too easy except for parking. The ride is soft, yet controlled, yet less leaning than 56. Handling is very good. The car shakes and rattles on rough roads and detracts from a well-behaved and pleasing automobile. Performance is similar to the Ford, but gas mileage is slightly worse than the others. Handling. Ford's steering still lacked road feel similar to previous years, but is improved in the 1957 models, and despite an increased steering ratio, the road sense is better. Chevrolet's steering remains excellent but requires more effort due to added front-end weight and new 14-inch tires. Plymouth's front suspension is insulated in rubber, enhancing steering ease and precision. Ball-joint steering pivots contribute to Plymouth's smooth handling. A smaller steering wheel improves visibility for shorter drivers. Ford and Plymouth benefit from a gratifying low-to-the-road feel that the Chevrolet lacks, even though Chevrolet's road-holding ability remains strong, matching last year's high standards. The Ford and Plymouth's softer suspensions do not lean more when taking curves, and the Chevy and Plymouth were able to keep their rear wheels on course better. Ride and suspension. The 1957 Ford saw a major improvement in ride quality, moving from a firm feel to a softer floating sensation similar to Chrysler cars. This made the Ford more comfortable over most roads, surpassing Chevrolet but still falling behind Plymouth in overall ride smoothness. Chevrolet's chassis remained largely unchanged, and its ride was still bouncy on uneven roads, though the springing maintained a sense of control, something Ford sometimes lacked. Plymouth handled severe bumps best, avoiding excessive jolts. However, Its suspension struggled with absorbing small bumps and had overly frequent slow oscillations on some roads. Plymouth featured a new, wider chassis with a unique front suspension design, torsion bar springs, and ball joints. Like Ford, its rear springs were mounted outside the frame. When it comes to shakes and rattles, none of the three cars excelled, though Chevrolet felt the most solid, followed by Ford, with Plymouth slightly behind. The front-end shake present in earlier Plymouth models had been eliminated, though, improving ride stability. Some magazines would declare the new Chrysler suspension revolutionary for its ride, and overall, Plymouth comes out on top for ride. Steering and handling. Ford's steering still lacked road feel similar to previous years, but is improved in the 1957 models, and despite an increased steering ratio, the road sense is better. Chevrolet's steering remains excellent but requires more effort due to added front-end weight and new 14-inch tires. Plymouth's front suspension is insulated in rubber, enhancing steering ease and precision. Ball joint steering pivots contribute to Plymouth's smooth handling. A smaller steering wheel improves visibility for shorter drivers. Ford and Plymouth benefit from a gratifying low-to-the-road feel that the Chevrolet lacks, even though Chevrolet's road-holding ability remains strong, matching last year's high standards. The Ford and Plymouth's softer suspensions do not lean more when taking curves, and the Chevy and Plymouth were able to keep their rear wheels on course better. Engines, performance, and braking. All standard engines utilized overhead valves, automatic chokes, use regular gas and two-barrel carbs, and all have various minor engine modifications that can be ordered. Chevy is the only one to use hydraulic lifters. The higher output, Chevy cars would use solid lifters with a hotter cam. The Ford choke gave erratic starting as it did on last year's test car. Chevy's engine was the quietest. Ford was the noisiest at low speeds. Chevy and Ford have similar gas mileage, and both beat the Plymouth's 301. Ford uses the same size engine but increased weight, which caused gas mileage to decrease over the 56. Chevy reduced the axle ratio, increased engine size, and has slightly better mileage than last year. Plymouth increased weight with the same axle ratio, resulting in mileage decrease with a larger engine. Performance from Ford and Plymouth will not result in complaints, but the Chevy is an outstanding fast performer for this level of trim. Now let's look at the three compared cars' numbers. All engines use approximately 8.5 to 1 compression ratio. The test Plymouth's 301 has 215 horsepower with 285 torque with a 3.54 rear end weighing 3,475 pounds. The Ford's 272 has 190 horsepower and 270 torque with a 310 rear end, weighs in at 3,475 pounds, and Chevy's 283 has 185 horsepower and 275 torque with a 3.36 rear end and weighs 3,300 pounds. The Plymouth Plaza would use a 277 cubic inch V8 with 197 horsepower, while the Fury would hit 290 horsepower with its 318 cubic inch engine. Chevy would use the 283 cubic inch engine across all models, with horsepower ranging from 162 to 283. Ford also has an optional at extra cost 312 cubic inch engine that makes 245 horsepower. Its top-of-the-line supercharged 312 engine would make 300 horsepower. This would essentially result in a tie in performance between the fuel-injected 283 horsepower Chevy against the 57 Fury 318, as both would pull a quarter mile in 17.5 seconds. The Plymouth would beat the Chevy in the 0 to 60, though. This comparison doesn't include the full-blown rare racing engines like the Ford F-Code cars, in which some claimed 14.1 second quarter-mile times, although this is not confirmed anywhere. Some confirmed Motor Trend numbers confirming 0 to 60 for these hot cars were 8 flat for the 57 Fury manual, 9 for the 283 fuel-injected auto, and 9.4 seconds for the 312 supercharged Ford Auto. Don't forget to subscribe for a future full breakdown of available performance numbers for 57 and other years' showroom cars. As for this comparison, 0 to 60, for the 185 horsepower Chevy was 11.2 seconds, Ford 12.8 seconds, and Plymouth would be 13.1 seconds. As for brakes, Ford would stop slightly shorter than the Plymouth, but both performed similar with fade, swerving, and hot spots. 60 to 0 for the Ford was 160 feet. 60 to 0 for the Plymouth was 170 feet, and Chevy testing was unavailable. Although all cars' brakes would begin fading after 3 to 4 hard stops and start developing swerving to the left or right, Chevy brakes were reported as the worst of the three, and Motor Trend would note that Chevy's brakes are inadequate for mountain driving or highway driving with traffic, fade early. As you can see here, mileage is fairly close, and you would expect the higher output of the Plymouth to result in lower gas mileage. Chevy and Ford mileage is essentially the same, and Plymouth would be 1 mile per gallon lower across the board. Final gas mileage for the Chevy and Ford come in at 15.5 and 14.4 for Plymouth. The Ford would gobble up engine oil and 1 quart per 1,100 miles. Plymouth would use a quart every 1,300 miles, and Chevy a quart every 1,600 miles. Summing up. As for build quality, one would expect the normal bugs, yet obviously the Chevy will always pull ahead in this category due to the fact the car is essentially in its 3rd year, and Ford and Plymouth are completely redesigned new cars. While the Chevy offers more headroom and easier entrance, the ride qualities are inferior to either the Ford or the Plymouth. The positives are excellent handling, and performance is the best of the 3 cars. Ford has narrowed the gap sharply in 57, surpassing the Chevy in ride quality, but fails to match the Plymouth, and other than that, receives an adequate rating. Plymouth excels in ride, driving, and interior room, and also includes plenty of trunk space and exceptionally easy steering. And while the 57 Plymouth has its issues, for example, more rattles and shakes, poorest gas mileage and average performance, comparing the fundamentals and putting the issues aside, and focusing primarily on the driver's experience, the Plymouth comes out on top with having the best combination of good handling, ride quality, and best interior space.
This magazine article would seem to choose the Plymouth just slightly over the Ford and Chevy, and while there is no doubt the long-term winner was the 57 Chevy, there certainly was some hype with the Plymouth for 57, and Chrysler would gain a lot of market share from GM. Other articles would blame the small or badly designed shocks for the poor 57 Chevy's ride. I wanted to update this film with additional information and also summarize it completely. Relevant information is included. I have another newsstand magazine article in which they compare the 270 horsepower Chevy, 245 horsepower Ford, and 235 horsepower Plymouth. Unfortunately, like most magazines that sell advertising to the automakers and were given vehicles for testing from the manufacturer, they don't pick a favorite. They downplay issues and certainly try to appease their customers as much as they could. I may do a follow-up article to highlight their findings also. The War of 1957 was certainly an interesting year for the automotive industry. I also plan to do an in-depth dive into issues for certain vehicles as I have service and survey information. New car buyers were able to complete mail in surveys on their cars with comments, and I find those particularly interesting. And as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more vintage articles and dealer training films.